Is it your claim that we do not need religion to be ethical in the modern world? And if so, why?
Ooh, yes, I would say that is a main claim. We don't need religion. So it's not that I want to rid the world of religion. I think in some instances, in certain manifestations, religion can further the alleviation of suffering, further justice, make the world a better place. No question about it. But what I'm always fighting against is the claim that we must have religion, we must have faith in God, that without these things, there will be no morality. And I just don't think that holds up either philosophically or statistically, sociologically, however you want to call it. And then, if I haven't had my coffee yet, I can sometimes make the claim that certain types of religion can actually thwart or hinder our moral development and our moral progress. I don't think that's as common, but it is, depending on the question, depending on the issue, and depending on the problem we're addressing.
And depending on whether or not there's blind faith, right? What is the purpose of God in the modern world? Do we even need religion at all? My guest today is Phil Zuckerman, and he has given a lot of thought to this topic. A sociologist, professor, and lifelong student of the nature and purpose of religion, he's currently a professor of sociology and secular studies at Pitzer College, and he is the founder of the first secular studies department in the nation, which entails the study of non-religious groups, people, thought, and cultural expressions. He's written several books, including What It Means to Be Moral, Living the Secular Life, and Society Without God. You can find his work regularly in both the Huffington Post and Psychology Today, where he blogs regularly under the title The Secular Life. I agree with you, because so much of what we actually are trying to hold on to in this modern world, if you really think about it and you're raising kids, it's culture. It's what foods do we eat? What language do we speak? What particular manifestation of celebrating the triumph of good over evil do we want to decorate our house for? It all comes down to the same damn thing, right? So let's take a step back. Phil Zuckerman, what sparked your interest in religion and in whether or not we are losing it?
So I grew up in a part of the world and at a time in history where religion was really not at play much. It was very marginal. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s in a part of Los Angeles up against the beach near Santa Monica. Most people were upper middle class, if not upper class. There wasn't a lot of racial diversity, and most people's lives revolved around things other than religion. And by that I mean, I didn't have a single friend whose family prayed at meal times. I didn't have a single friend who couldn't do something on Sunday because they went to church. Like it just, so, and it's not to say that it was completely secular. There was some religion. There was a Catholic church in town, and we knew some kids did attend that Catholic school. There was a synagogue, and many of the Jews in the town I grew up and were somehow involved. But again, like you said, it was very much more cultural. No one was doing this for God or Hashem or Adonai. Nobody kept kosher, and it was really just a kind of a cultural hub. So it's like there was religion, but it was very muted, it was very benign, and it didn't seem to hold much sway over anybody's life. And so
for you personally,
I'm a third generation non-believer. So my four grandparents were all born in Europe. My dad's folks were from Warsaw, Poland, where the Jews were kept. And my mom's parents were from Bohemia, or the Sudetenland, which was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. My dad's parents were from extremely poor conditions, didn't go to school, didn't have a bathroom, didn't have running water, and basically saw social democracy or socialism as the hope for humanity. And part of that was being non-religious or even anti-religious. So they became, they were able to get out of Poland and then enter the United States illegally. My grandfather, in fact, was arrested and deported to Canada and snuck back in. So I am the proud descendant of someone who came into this country illegally. And they lived and they were just factory workers in the Bronx, but they had no interest in religion and would not set foot in a synagogue or whatnot. My mom's parents were more upper middle class. They escaped the Nazis by the harrowed their chinny chin chin and came out, and because they had some connections, they had to go to Belgium and then England, and somehow got in to the United States. And they were more interested in art and literature and music and dance. That was their culture. So religion, again, just they came to the United States and they put up a Christmas tree and they went skiing at Christmas. Like they just were like, we're Americans now. So then my folks also, same thing. My dad was a Yiddish speaking, ethnic Jew, and my mom was a German speaking ethnic Jew, daughter of people who escaped the Holocaust. But I was never, ever told there was a God. I was never, ever told that prayer would do anything. It wasn't even that I was told prayer doesn't work. I was never told to pray. Like it just, So I was raised completely secular in outlook. But yeah, I've always been a non-believer. So I'll end that by saying the difference between me and all my other friends and relatives was, as soon as I learned about religion, particularly Christianity, I was sort of fascinated, whereas everybody else just whatever, they didn't really care. When I had my first serious girlfriend, she was the daughter of a pastor, and I went to church with them, and I was like, for some reason, I found religion extremely strange, a little bit unnerving, a little bit dangerous, a little bit scary, and I wanted to understand it because I was like, wait, what do you mean you believe this? So I became sort of obsessed with trying to understand how and why people could believe religion, and when you want to study religion, there's a lot out there. So that started my journey in I read all about the religions of the world. I read all their holy books. I was constantly wanting to talk and engage people who are religious and try to understand what's going on. And I don't know why. Someone would say, maybe a Freudian would say, deep down inside, I'm searching or whatever, because I'm obsessed with it, but so far it hasn't taken. And then in terms of losing religion, it became clear to me as a social scientist, as a working sociologist, that in many, many societies around the world, more and more people are losing their religion and becoming less and less religious for the first time to such a degree that we've never seen in history. And no one was really exploring that, analyzing it, documenting it. So that became sort of a professional passion as well. Oh, wait a minute, we now have societies where a majority of people don't believe in God. Democracies. This is incredible. What is there to learn about these countries and these people, and how can we understand secular culture?
And what comes from it, right? What does it mean for us? Not whether or not it's good or bad, but where are we going now, right? Yeah. What popped into my mind as you were speaking was kind of interesting, because I'm raising kids right now, and I'm raising them with two religions, because my ex-husband is Lutheran and I'm Hindu, and I'm very intellectually Hindu. So reincarnation makes sense to me because it boils down to energy. So you can call it a soul, but it doesn't really matter. And so a lot of people of my generation, I think, tend to intellectualize their religious beliefs as they get older so that they can make sense of what it is they want to tell their kids, right? Your parents didn't talk about religion. It results in a little boy who gets a girlfriend, and in a way, it's almost a rebellion to go diving into this foreign world of religion and what do these people believe in the Bible, and really, do they really believe that happened? So it just sort of goes to show you that whatever you give your kids, they're going to run away from. Often. And whatever you don't give your kids, they're going to run towards. I'm going to puzzle out later what this means for my kids. Maybe I'll start telling them they're not allowed to go to college.
There you go.
At all costs, you're not allowed to have a Nobel Prize. I will not allow it.
Exactly.
I do not accept it. Okay.
Then they got to rebel.
Back to the topic, right? Back to the topic at hand. I looked into some of the statistics about this. You saw the trend towards people, quote unquote, losing their religion, but you weren't interested in studying, is it a good or a bad thing? You were just interested in studying it to say, what does it mean for us as a society? But the statistics are, the World Value Survey studied the importance of God on average in 44 countries between 2007 and 2019. The importance of God in people's lives declined in 39 of those 44 countries. The percentage of people identifying as non-religious rose by more than 10% in Singapore, Iceland, Chile, and South Korea over that past decade. But the decline of religion was most striking in the United States. Between 1940 and 2000, an average church membership in the USA hovered around 70%. And that's according to Gallup. 70% from 1940 to 2000, which surprised me. But as the new millennium got underway, it fell off a cliff. And by 2020, church membership had fallen to 47%, from 70 to 47 in only 20 years. Between 2007 and 2020, the proportion of Americans not affiliated with any religion grew from 16% to 30%. Now, There's obviously a difference between being an atheist and being unaffiliated. And I think it matters for this conversation. Being unaffiliated with a specific religion. Is one category growing faster than the other, atheist versus unaffiliated? Can you talk to me about what these statistics are really telling us?
Yeah, good question. So let's start with our definitions, and that's where things always get a little murky and muddy. So what I would say is an atheist is generally understood as someone who lacks a belief in a god or gods, doesn't have a belief in a god or gods. And that can be out of ignorance, like maybe they don't know about the god Perkunas, the ancient Baltic lord. So they are atheistic when it comes to Perkunas because they are unaware of Perkunas' existence. Or it can be an act of rejection, like I've learned about Perkunas, I'm not convinced that Perkunas exists, hence I don't believe in Perkunas. So an atheist is someone who generally, when asked, do you believe in God, says no. And we don't know if that's because they used to and they've rejected it, or because they never learned about it, or it's not important to them, or whatever. But an atheist is generally someone without a belief in God or gods. The thing about that is, in every survey, if you ask people if they believe in God or not, the rate who says no is always higher. In the next question could be, are you an atheist? It will shrink. So if you ask people if they believe in a God or not, you'll get a certain percentage saying no, but they don't want to identify as an atheist. They don't like the label. And this gets into sort of the social stigma and what it means in people's minds. So for a lot of people, atheist means an angry person, someone who hates religion, someone who's immoral, amoral, someone who kills without compunction, things like that. So an atheist analytically is just someone who lacks a belief in God, but in our social world, an atheist is someone who claims that title, like I'm an atheist. And those are they're the same thing in terms of orientation, but they're different socially and historically and culturally. Okay, so.
Well, and it's vanity. I have to interject. I just saw this horrible statistic that said they surveyed boys in college. And on average, at any time you asked, would you ever rape someone? The answer was no. Anytime, meanwhile, you asked if a girl is asleep or semi-conscious, would you sleep with her if you knew nobody would ever find out? And many, the answer was yes.
Interesting.
So there's a vanity piece to it. But anyway, that's just a depressing digression. I do want you to give the distinction atheist, agnostic, and non-religious.
Sure, you bet. So again, it's like, in the hard sciences, you can define oxygen, and that's oxygen whether you're in Mumbai or Montana. But for these terms, people have different meanings. So atheist, someone who lacks a belief in God or doesn't believe in God. An agnostic is someone who isn't sure, uncertain, lacks knowledge. So when you ask them, do you believe in a God? They say, I don't know. I'm not convinced there isn't a God. I'm not convinced there is a God. So it's a little bit of a kind of undecided, unsure. So like I've lived in Scandinavia, that's far more common. Far more people will say, maybe there is a God, maybe there isn't, I don't really know, rather than there is no God or I don't believe in God, full stop. So atheist is someone who says, I don't believe there's a God, I don't have a belief in a God, and that's where and an agnostic is someone who just says, agnostic simply means without knowledge, without knowing, I just don't know. It's a more, I think, intellectually humble position. I think it's epistemologically more sound. We just don't know. Yeah. And then now we get into the sort of non-religious or unaffiliated. And that's, again, another question. That has to do with kind of how you identify in your community, in your world, what waters you swim in. Are you a member of a church or synagogue or mosque or temple? Do you do certain rituals? In fact, we talk about belief, behavior, and belonging as sort of the three pillars of religious life. And so, and they not all religions emphasize all three B's to the same degree. In some religions, it's all about behavior, and some it's all about belief, and some it's all about belonging. So with unaffiliated or non-religious, all that is when people are asked the question, which of the following religions are you a member of any of these religions, or do you belong to any of these religions? And they're given a zillion, options, from this kind of Jew to that kind of Sufi to this kind of Muslim to this kind of, and then the last one will often be like none of the above. Right. So if someone ticks none of the above, all that tells us is they don't identify as Lutheran, they don't identify as Shia, they don't identify as Hindu. it doesn't tell us what they do identify as. It just says, I'm rejecting all of those labels. They could still very, very strongly believe in Jesus, but they don't want to identify as Christian for political reasons or cultural reasons or personal reasons. They could very, very strongly believe in Allah, but they don't want to tick the box of Muslim for whatever reason, political reasons, social reasons, stigma reasons. So the none of the above is really what we've seen an explosion of it all around the world, but particularly in the United States. More and more people ticking none of the above. Now, usually they're correlated. So if someone's going to say none of the above, there's a much higher chance, like 50% of them are going to be atheists or agnostics in orientation. But it's always going to be bigger, and that's where we have seen a growth of atheists in the United States. We have seen a growth of agnostics in the United States, but the real explosion has been the none of the above, what we call the nones, N-O-N-E-S's. And within that, they're not all atheists, they're not all agnostics. All they share is they don't want to identify with an organized religion. They may be spiritual.
And organized is the point, right?
Exactly.
It's murky. The term non-religious is murky because they say up to 30% of Americans call themselves non-religious and up to 40% of Americans in their 20s. But non-religious can just mean that they are not comfortable being affiliated with the specific organized religion that is available to them at this moment where they live.
Exactly. So take Catholics. Like, many Catholics were horrified and angered by the pedophile priest scandals, the cover-up of the pedophile priest scandals. And a lot of them stopped attending their local church, Catholic church. A lot of them didn't want to donate money. I mean, there was a real disaffiliation. That doesn't mean they went home and became atheists. They may still believe in Jesus and God and Mother Mary, and maybe it's just become a more personal relationship with those deities, but they're mad at the Catholic Church. So that said, now fortunately, we can go in to the non-affiliated population and ask them these questions. So it doesn't have to remain a mystery. And American Religious Identification Survey does this. A lot of they go in and they say, okay, if you check none of the above, go to page 3. We have other questions for you. So we know that, again, among the non-religious, they tend to be much more likely to be secular than not. Like, half of them are atheists or agnostics, but about a quarter of them still believe in God, and a quarter of them have a different spiritual orientation to the world. Maybe they don't call it God, but they believe in a higher power. So again, these things are correlated. As the number of non-religious people increases, we also expect atheism and agnosticism to increase, but it's always a subset.
I would love to see a study on the proportion of people who call themselves non-religious now in the general population versus in populations where they grew up extreme in their religion, fundamentalist in their religion, whether that be like Christian fundamentalist, Islamic fundamentalist. If you could find 25 pockets in America where people were raised with the keep sweet, don't talk to men, no skirt above the ankle. And then equivalent, the children who are raised where, like, your brother can go to school, you can't. Right. And so I would love to see that distinction of how many people are non-religious now for that reason, because it seems to me like with those really extreme religious upbringings of any kind, there's almost a sadness and a loss when they leave that organization because there were beliefs they wanted to hold on to, and now they
community and ritual and tradition. I mean, it's a whole package. Yes, you're losing the comfort of certain beliefs, but you're also losing, in many cases, family, friends, memory, childhood, heritage. Like, there's so much that goes with it. But all I will say to that is that, yes, there's a huge difference between people that leave religion, but the religion they were leaving was kind of a benign, non-fundamentalist religion anyway. So in a way, it's just sort of like a watering down, and then they go off to college and they just stop going. And those folks usually are not bitter towards religion. They don't identify as atheists. But the people that were raised in strongly fundamentalist, orthodox, absolutist religions, be they Mormons, Orthodox Jews, fundamentalist Muslims, whatever it is, if they do lose their faith, it's much more of a struggle. It's much more of a trauma. It's much more of a dramatic break. And when they step away, the consequences are very big existentially, philosophically, but also personally and familially. And they're the ones who often will seek out other secular communities. They'll join atheist meetups because they're either needing some social support, or they're needing some psychological comfort, and they're the ones that are going to be more anti-religious. The ones that are raised in kind of liberal versions of religion, if they stop being religious, it's not a big deal. They just kind of move on, and they're not mad at religion, and they don't feel traumatized by religion. But I was just at a conference in Canada for atheists, agnostics, and humanists, and I mean there were booths there called like Recovering from Religion, and there were people there who were specifically like, we are trying to help you overcome the trauma of your religious upbringing. And so there is a big difference there.
Yeah, there is, and I think it sort of speaks to the original purpose of religion, which is man was ape, man became man. And one night, after killing enough mastodons and having enough meat and being in the cave, and there was a warm fire and no one was going to get eaten that night, man looked up at the sky and thought, is this all there is? And that was the birth of religion, right? The idea is, for everyone on earth, I don't care what anybody says, I don't care where you come from, that is where religion came from. Am I going to be okay? I'm no longer running and my belly is full, but I'm not totally asleep yet. Am I going to die tomorrow or 6 years from now? Does it matter? Is anyone watching? Was the beginning of religion. It was supposed to give us comfort, right? And so if the people who, like you said, were not super fundamentalist in the way they were raised, are now the ones who are more likely to be giving up their religion or saying they're non-religious, that just proves the point. Because we only needed religion when we didn't know if we could survive without it, right? That caveman needed to know there was a God.
So there's a lot to be said there. You've covered a lot of territory.
You're not going to change my mind about the cavemen, though. That is where religion comes from.
Not
bastardized, but yeah.
Yeah, we can go there, and I'm happy to talk about it. But what I would say is, there's a tremendous amount of sociological evidence supporting your latter claims, which is that as life becomes more existentially secure, I don't mean philosophically, but I mean your existence. If you have a place to sleep, your food's coming, you have education, you have health care, you're not under any immediate threats from nature or from your neighbors. Like, when life becomes more secure, religion plummets in society after society after society. So that we have tons of international data. We even have internal data within countries. Like, you can go county by county, state by state, province by province, where there's more poverty, more crime, more unsurety about where your next paycheck's coming from, where the housing market is crunching and tight, where there's, a lot, people are more religious. They need that comfort. They need that security. And when religion and when society does a better job of establishing, calm and consistency and democracy, and there's healthcare and there's equal rights or attempts, all of that, religion just completely spirals. People don't need that father, daddy taking care of them. They don't need to know that I better watch my P's and Q's or I won't have food tomorrow. So on that front, I completely agree with you. And so does the data. So it's not just speculation. Like, there's a strong, consistent and robust correlation between any society where people have what their basic needs met tend to be less religious, and any society where basic needs are not being met tend to be much more religious, for sure.
And it perfectly dovetails into my next question, which I was going to ask one way, but now I need to ask both ways. My question was, you state that the least religious countries have the lowest crime. Why do you think that is? But now I'm thinking, in a way, is it that the countries with the least crime and the most safety need the least religion, right? But you said the least religious countries have the lowest crime. So let's start with that. Why do you think it is?
Yeah. Okay, so again, that assertion gets often misinterpreted, so thanks for asking. A lot of people think I'm saying, if we all become atheists and agnostics, murder will go down and assault will go down. Like, religion is causing all this. No, I live in a country where most of the politicians are, whenever there's something bad, they say it's because we've lost faith in God. Why was there a school shooting? Oh, we've stopped being religious. We've turned away from God. Why is there such a high murder rate, in this part of town? Oh, they're not religious. If we stop being religious, all will go to hell. So I'm always kind of trying to argue against that. So I'm going to say, well, that claim I can disprove. How do I disprove it? All I have to do is, well, I can disprove it in many ways, but the most common ways, well, let's just look at democracies that are the least religious. If your theory is correct, then they should have the highest crime rates, the highest murder rates, the highest daily violence rates, but we see the opposite. So I've just knocked out the knees of, Mike Huckabee or Sarah Huckabee's claim, or our White House. So what is going on here? When you look at societies or states or counties and you measure their crime rates, their violent crime rates, their assault rates, their violence rates, they tend to be the lowest on those societies today that are the least religious. Now, that is, I would argue, most likely a result of what we talked about earlier. They've got their shit together in other ways. If people have decent incomes and housing and healthcare and childcare and elder care, and crime just tends to plummet anyway. And so does religion. These things. So if anything, I would argue that, when societies are more healthy, the need for religion goes down. Oh, and simultaneously, crime rates will go down.
Right.
There are some addendums to that. I do think sometimes religion can be a factor. So I like to cite Jainism. Like, Jains are the most nonviolent religious culture on planet Earth. They don't even kill bugs.
Oh, that's right. They have a thing where you can't even eat them. You can't even.
Yeah, their symbol, right? is a mask and a broom, because it symbolizes, like, you don't even want to breathe in an insect by accident, and you don't want to step on or sit on a bug by accident. So they are completely anti-violence, anti-killing. And so in that case, where you see a lot of Jains, there's not a lot of violent crime. Same with Silent Friend Quakers. Pacifist religions on earth will contribute. However, let's look at Japan. Japan has no history of Christianity, Islam, or Judaism foundationally. I mean, yes, there's always been 0.01% of people there, but Japan is a traditionally Shinto and Buddhist society, and it has the lowest murder rates on planet Earth. So I think part of that has to do with their successful economic and social institutions, but there's also something to be said about their Buddhist history and their Shinto history. Like, you can't separate those. So it's always muddy and murky. But what we can say is, if we lose our religion, that does not necessarily mean crime will go up. Usually it means crime will go down, because what's causing us to lose our religion is we're solving all these social problems. We're solving poverty. We're solving healthcare crises, and so on and so forth. That, and then the final addendum I will say, though, is when we look at the history of most of these societies that have done the best job of providing healthcare to their citizens, housing for their citizens, and education for their citizens, across the board, those societies, we know who spearheaded those movements, and it was usually secular men and women politically. Not always, but usually, certainly in the case of Scandinavia, certainly in the case of Great Britain, certainly in the case throughout much of Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the political parties that said, let's have universal health care, let's let women the right to vote, did that up against the resistance of the religious. They tended to be secular themselves, who wanted to say, let's have an 8-hour workday, let's increase unionization, let's increase worker safety. Like, all those things, the religious, that used to be their territory. They were the ones that provided charity. They were the ones that provided elder care. They were the ones that ran the hospitals. They didn't want government stepping in. So the religious often fought against social welfare, social progress, not always, but often. So that's just a sort of historical footnote, that often the people that pushed for universal health care were themselves secular. Often the people that pushed for these great social outcomes, not always, but often. So I don't even know if I answered your question, but...
No, you did. And it really makes the point, right? Because you're not saying religion is bad. You're saying, if in the right hands and in the right perspective, religion's great, sure, use it if you have it, use it if you want it. But you also claim that God belief is a hindrance to true morality. And that example of secularism going up against religious to try to get social programming to just help the masses is a perfect example of it. And
absolutely.
Why? You said religion reduces morality to obedience.
Absolutely.
That word obedience doesn't even register for me, because I wasn't raised with a religion of obedience, So when I think of religion, when I think of religions that have this constant undertone of obedience, I don't understand. It makes me feel like the military, which I obviously would have also never survived in, but I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the more every single day I realize how lucky I was that I will never understand obedience-based life, religion, anything. But somehow inner morality must be on average very high then, right? You must be very optimistic about people. Because if you think that God belief is a hindrance to true morality, then you must believe that on balance, if left without religion, humans would come to conclusions that would be somewhat moral.
Absolutely. No question about it. And I love you're sensitive and nuanced in your language. It's perfect. Yes, on balance, I think was really stood out for me. So we know that humans existed for a zillion years before these religions were even created. So these religions are the products. They're not the source. Religions came out of human culture, human storytelling, human thought. They didn't start it. They didn't begin it. They come very late in the game. And in fact, the stories we tell, whether Hindu stories, Buddhist stories, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, those are very late in the, they're very recent additions to our history as Homo sapiens. And they were attempts to encode, capture, solidify things that were already brewing within us. I think the evidence is very clear that we evolved from pre-human primates. We evolved from other hominid primate species, and we've always been pack animals. We've always been living in groups of 15, 20, 30, 40, 80. That's how we survived. We evolved the ability to cooperate. Without it, those primates that couldn't cooperate, they didn't leave any descendants because they died out.
They didn't.
Yeah. We evolved the ability to have what is called the theory of mind, like where I can sort of try and guess or assume what you're thinking. So I can try to guess your internal state, and that helps me develop empathy, compassion, strategy. It also helps me cheat you. Like it works both ways. If I can guess what you're thinking, I can manipulate you. Yeah. And we developed a strong in-group favoritism and an out-group hostility. All these things, it's a double-edged sword. But clearly, if our selfish, violent, hateful natures were predominant, we would have died out because we would have just killed each other endlessly. So they're in our nature, but I don't think they're not over 50%. Maybe in some of us they are, but if you take 100 people, you're going to see this variation. You're going to see a bell curve within each individual and within the group. Most of us don't like violence. Most of us don't feel good around it. We don't like to see others suffer. Is there always that outlier that is a sadomasochist? Sure, but they're the outlier. Most of us, most of the time, prefer to have honest relationships rather than deceitful relationships. Most of us, most of the time, prefer to experience love rather than hate. Most of us prefer to experience compassion rather than enmity. I mean, these are just general tendencies, and they're going to anywhere on planet Earth where there are Homo sapiens, those are going to be the dominant. There's always those exceptions. There's always going to be those times where we will act selfishly. We will act with hostility. Our violent tendencies will erupt, but they are the exceptions, not the rule. And there's always going to be those times when our out-group suspicions can be easily tapped. All Trump has to say is they're coming from Mexico to steal your jobs, and there's almost a bioevolutionary, he just rings that bell and we start salivating because it's part of our bioevolutionary history, that in-group, out-group tendencies. But I am convinced that most of us, most of the time, tend towards the moral and ethical, and we learn it. In addition to the bioevolutionary foundation, we learn it through life experience. So your parents can teach you a zillion things, but if your parents are living a certain way, if your parents are lying and are violent and are unkind and uncompassionate, you can go to a zillion Sunday school classes or read the Bible. You're going to develop a damaged moral orientation. It's going to be challenged. You may still persevere, and many do, but it's going to be challenged. And that was one of the things I found about secular culture is that most parents, they live their morality. They don't teach it. And so when you ask them, what morals and values do you teach your children, they're all a little bit dumbfounded. Like, well, what do you mean? And then
was I supposed to do that? Wait.
Yeah. And it's just like, actually, exactly. It's just the day-to-day life, how things function in your home, when you go to the grocery store. That's where your children are really, if they're learning morality at all, they're learning it from their experiences. And again, that can be religious. I've met many people who were immersed in very ethical, moral, religious traditions, and they ingested that as well. But the religion's not necessary, and sometimes it can be a hindrance. Not always, but often it can be in a way that most people don't recognize.
Well, either way, their parents were reinforcing it. Because if they went to shul or temple or whatever, and then on the way home, their dad spits his bubble gum onto the sidewalk, they're seeing that. Even if
Absolutely.
They're going to shul and whatever, and on the way home, they see their mother stops for a cup of tea and she delicately wipes off the table, even though there is someone coming to clean it.
Yeah.
They see that, right? Like it's really small stuff.
I agree with that, but I would even take it a step further. In your scenario, the implication is that at shul, at church, or at temple, they are learning moral things, and then they see their parents not reinforcing them. I would argue that often at mosque, at shul, at church, at temple, they're actually learning very immoral things even there.
Well, yeah, and that brings me to what I was thinking as you were speaking before, which is conclusion is Phil Zuckerman is very optimistic about people, and we should all be optimistic, so that's good. Also, Poonam was wrong. It's not that the caveman in the cave late at night with the belly full in the fire and for one brief moment not afraid for his survival was the birth of religion. It was actually the birth of God. And at that moment, he wanted to believe someone was there. So he believed there was a God. Fine. Higher power. But then human society came in, and unfortunately in human society, the loudest voice gets the mic or the talking stick, and the loudest voice said, yeah, let's take this God thing, but let's teach it to you through something called religion. And by the way, religion says women should shut up because my wife's annoying. And there you go. And now here we are. Exactly. And we're all losing our religion because everybody bastardizes everything.
I just have to say a couple things. So first, what I would say is I like your cavemen scenario. I think it's quite valid, and I would put a lot of my gambling chips on that if I had to bet on the origins. I think the difference for me is it's not that humans needed to think there was a God. I think it's more broadly that humans needed to feel like things weren't just random. That was too terrifying to think, we got food tonight, but we may not tomorrow. I'm healthy today. Tomorrow I have, like, my foot is infected and it has to be chopped off. Like, the randomness and seeming precariousness of existence was too much for humans to bear. So I'm thinking of things like Buddhism, where there isn't a belief in a God, but there is a belief in this kind of karmic rule. So you are responsible for, if you're experiencing something good, you must have done something good in the past. If you're experiencing something bad, you must have done something bad in the past. And even that gives us a sense of, okay, I have some, it's not all random. It's not just like, and I think that's the kernel of most religions, that either there's a daddy protecting us, or there's a mommy protecting us, or there's some kind of karmic law protecting us. And that, I think, was a great comfort in a world that actually is quite random, precarious, and devastatingly so, and existentially, to think that it's just that we have no control, even if we did good deeds. So, I go to
that's what I meant by God. A system,
so I totally agree with that.
A balance sheet or a referee.
Exactly. You got it. And then, and that one that we can tap into also, that we can, if through our good behavior or our pleading or whatever, that we can affect things. And then the other thing I'd say is, I am by nature an optimistic person, and I have always been very optimistic about humanity. That is starting to fray. I'm sad to say at 56, I'm starting to realize maybe I was a bit naive all my life. Maybe my optimism is just a biochemical result of my brain chemistry, but I'm starting to feel less optimistic about humans and our potential. And, I grew up thinking the worst had been over, like, we got through World War II. We got, like, everything it can only get better. And I even remember when Obama was elected, dancing in the streets with our children and our neighbors, playing music, thinking like we crossed this, we got over. And now I feel like, no, our genocidal tendencies are as alive and well as ever. Our xenophobic tendencies are alive and as well as ever. And as the planet heats up, as AI takes over, I now think we may be doomed, but I hope I'm wrong.
It's very realistic, what you're saying, and I have a similar sentiment lately where I realize, like, nobody's life turns out the way they expected it to, but I'm sitting here in New York and I'm thinking, I'm still more optimistic than most people I know. I think there's a similarity here. I grew up in a world where my parents always believed in the inherent goodness of pretty much everyone, and they were almost always right, because they believed in people till they showed it. Now, here I am, and I've seen that it doesn't always work that way in many situations in my life and in the world that I've seen. And I see that my parents are still flabbergasted when it doesn't work that way. And rather than trying to tell them, open your eyes, the world isn't that great, I think, how blessed am I to have grown up with people like that?
It's true.
Because that's my operating system.
It's true.
And how lucky am I? Because people spend a lifetime trying to fight against the broken parts of their operating system.
You're right.
So you're optimistic, and I believe people are on balance good, and you and I are right. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
going to give it to our kids. You have kids, I have kids. And
Yeah.
it's worth it to believe that because it
Yeah.
doesn't cost you anything. And
That's
if we can
right.
believe it by accident, we really, really need not to talk ourselves out of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I appreciate that. Well said. Well said.
7 secular virtues. No, 7 secular virtues. Tell me about 7 secular virtues.
Yeah.
That you say that secular societies operate under.
Or secular culture. Society, I don't know if it gets to that level, but secular people and secular culture. So what you'll find is that a couple things. People associate morality with religion. That's just an absolute given. Like, even whether they're religious or not, like that, it's just so welded into our world that, oh, morality and religion, they must be the same thing, and morality must come from religion, and so on and so forth. And what you'll get too in religion is very clear articulations of things. You'll literally get 10 commandments, don't do this, don't do that, do this. 4 noble truths. You'll get these clear articulations in religion that people can seize onto. So then when I started studying secular culture, secular families, secular people raising their kids, older secular people in the military, like people, living their lives, it's like, well, wait a minute. They're living their lives by certain precepts and principles and values, just like religious people. They just don't have a list. They don't say, here's my secular list. I got this from, the American Humanist Association. By the way, there are these proclamations. Now that I mentioned, you can go to the American Humanist website and see a list of their values. You can read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has, values that are secularly articulated and secularly inspired. But most non-religious people or secular people are not walking around with 10 secular commandments, or they don't have a list. And so they actually fumble when they're asked. Again, if you're in a dorm, if your kid goes off to college and there's a fundamentalist Christian, and you say to them, where do you get your morals? They say, well, I get my morals from God. I get my morals from the Bible. Well, what are they? Oh, thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not cheat. Thou shalt not, they'll have it kind of. And then if they have a non-religious agnostic roommate from Santa Monica, and they say, where do you get your morals? That person's going to be like, well, what do you mean? I don't really think about it. I've never thought about it before. Well, what are your key values? Well, I don't know, be a good person. Like, they don't have it articulated as much. And what I found was that they do live by them. So when I would do in-depth interviews with people, I would really try and draw it out. And one way I would do that is I would say to people, well, I still do this research, if I ask them, what are the kind of key values you try to live by? If they were tongue-tied, I'd say, well, let me ask you this. What traits or characteristics would you like to see in your children? Suddenly they have a lot to say. I want them to be honest. I want them to live an authentic life. I want them to pursue something that has meaning. I want them to, suddenly they have all these values. Like, okay. So what I found was when you talk to secular people and you live in largely secular cultures, there are actual virtues that are very prominent. And I tried to list them in my book, What It Means to Be Moral, and I think I came up with 7, and I don't even know if I can remember them right now, but I'll do my best. So number one,
post them on the clip. Yeah.
So number one, there's what I call a here and nowness. Secular people, this is life. This is it. We are not constantly living for some future existence in heaven, or so we're not teaching that to our children, and we're not telling ourselves, well, do this so you can have a better life in heaven. I mean, I have religious relatives who will say to each other, I can't wait till we're angels, at the foot of God, you and me, living, okay, whatever, if that gets you through the night. But we have a certain here and nowness, which I think is a virtue, because it compels us to solve problems in the here and now, improve our lives in the here and now, make the world a better place in the here and now. Next, we base our actions and on others on empathy and compassion. Like, how would this feel? Am I causing suffering or not? Rather than, is this making the sky daddy happy? Is this going to send me to hell? Is this going to send me to heaven? Is this going to get me merits in the Buddhist temple? No, I have empathy and compassion. I don't want to see you suffer. I don't want to see you in pain. And it makes me feel bad if I were to cause that. That's a kind of, again, and I'm not saying that religious people also don't have these. Of course they do. But I think they're purer, as it were, or more abundant in secular culture. A third one is,
from within.
Yeah, a third one is, I would say, a reliance on empirical evidence when making decisions and claims about the world. Like, if we want to know how to stop crime, what actually works? Let's just not philosophically think this might do it. No, what actually works? Does putting people in solitary confinement cause them to be less violent when they get out? Or does teaching them a skill while they're incarcerated cause them to do less crime when they get out? Like, what is the evidence-based, whether it's about medicine, whether it's about crime, whether it's about human thriving? We look for evidence into what, in a way that I think we don't rely on faith. We don't rely on faith to make us healthy, solve crime, increase democracy. Like, prayer is not a tool for us. We have to live in the here and now and use our action based on empathy and compassion and rational, empirical, evidence-based decision-making. I would say we also, what were some of my others? I'd have to go get my book, Other 7 Secular Virtues. I would say cosmopolitanism is a biggie. And what that means is, all religions teach us that we're all brothers and sisters created either by a god or by some spiritual divine entity. And Darwin evolution teaches us that we're all brothers and sisters because we evolved from the same primate ancestors. So what I find is that which actually plays out. What we find is, across the board, strong religiosity is actually correlated with higher ethnocentrism, higher tribalism, higher in-group, out-group thinking, and strong belief in the acceptance of Darwinian evolution is actually correlated with cosmopolitanism, universalism. National boundaries are constructs. Racial boundaries are constructs. We're all one people. So what you actually find is, I'll give you some examples. Let's take India. The more secular Indians, the rationalist Indians, the Indians that have rejected their beliefs, are far more anti the caste system, far more open to mixed marriaging across caste and across Islam and Hindu, and far more open to cohabitating. The more strongly Hindu are much more, anti-Muslim, let's separate, let's keep the caste system alive and well, if not legally, at least in practice. Let's look at Israel and Palestine. The more religious Israelis are the most driven towards let's exterminate and genocide our Palestinian neighbors. The more secular Israelis, also having difficulty there, but are much more open to a binational state, a multinational state, equality. And on the Muslim side, among Palestinians, the more Islamic Palestinians are the more like, let's get rid of every last Jew on planet Earth. And the more secular Palestinians, even though they don't like living under apartheid, are still willing to grant that, well, we're not going to exterminate each other. Let's live together. Let's have a binational state, a two-state solution. Let's do what we can. You see this across the board. So cosmopolitanism is the notion that we're all one. We're all a global species, and national boundaries and religious boundaries, and these are divisions that are unhelpful and often cause a lot of pain and suffering. So those are some of so when I wrote that chapter on the 7 secular virtues, I was trying to tell the world, like, there are these moral, ethical orientations that are abundant in secular culture, and I'm going to name them because my informants are articulating them, and I'm going to list them. And I purposely didn't want to do 10 because that's just so Old Testament. I had to do 7 because it alliterates with secular.
Well, and 7 is the magic number in science and
that's
all
true.
that kind of stuff. So that works out well. That in particular was helpful for me because there's a distinction between you saying these are the 7 secular virtues by which I believe the world should operate without religion, versus saying I have studied them and this is how they are living. So
exactly.
It
was more like what emerged to the surface. That said, I do think all those virtues are helpful for living, but they're not all of them. So I'll give you an example. In Christianity, there is a strong emphasis on forgiveness, and I like that. Do Christians always live up to it? Not necessarily, but you don't. I think that's a biggie that I really like. I find, so I think there are some virtues that are more abundant in the religious landscape than not. What I would like to say is, I think that those secular virtues, while they are strongest maybe in secular culture, you also find them in religious culture, and they bleed into each other. So like charity is a big virtue in many religions, certainly in Islam. And you don't hear a lot of secular people talking about charity. So there's another example. However, secular people are much more likely to want to make charity structured and institutionalized. In other words, secular people are much more likely to say, yes, let's have universal health care. I'm not going to donate. I don't donate as much to my local hospital as the church does, but I want to have let's have all healthcare be free and you can tax me. So it just kind of morphs in weird ways.
It's different terminology, but it's beautiful because it shows that hopefully your optimism is correct. And in general, on balance, people will want to do right by each other.
Right.
If given the chance, even
Yeah.
outside the construct of religion. And we want to believe
Exactly.
that. So the last question I have for you is, will we be better off in 50 years if religion is gone?
Yes and no. In the societies on planet Earth that are not doing well, that don't have health care, that don't have housing, where the bombs are falling and the crime rates through the roof, there's not a lot of hope. In those situations, religion's often the only thing keeping people coping. So, would I want to pull religion out of Haiti? No. I mean, I don't have anything to offer other than these, structural cures, and if I can't implement them. However, in societies that are more stable, more secure, and more successful, then yes, actually, they will be better off with less religion in 50 years. You'll see more rights for women. You'll see more rights for sexual nonconformists and gender nonconformists. You'll see more care and compassion for animals. You'll see increased care for our environment. All of those things are correlated with secularity. So I think you'll see more rational decision making in terms of politics, law, government, economics. So in those societies that have a functioning democracies, yes, as religion goes down, I think you'll see improvement. You'll see less tribalism, you'll see less ethnocentrism. But in those societies that are struggling right now, I would predict if religion were to evaporate in 50 years, they'd maybe even be in a worse place. In those societies, sometimes religion is the only thing providing health care, providing food, providing shelter, providing hope. So that's the best answer I could give.
I'll take it. So our hope is that everyone on the planet gets up to the point where survival is no longer a concern, and that when it gets there, we all let go of the ghost of God and just start taking care of each other.
Amen. Shit, man, you got to quote that. You got to quote that. Let go of the ghost of God and start taking care of each other. Whew, I love that.